You find yourself drifting, not quite awake, not quite asleep, into a world shimmering with the dust of ages. It's a place where gods meddle, heroes squabble, and the fate of entire cities hangs by the silken thread of prophecy. Imagine the air, thick with the scent of olives and sea salt, under a sky so intensely blue it feels like a painted backdrop. You're not just listening, you're there, a quiet observer as the ancient currents of destiny begin to swirl. The stage is set in a vibrant corner of what we now call the Aegean, a patchwork quilt of city-states, each with its own king, its own pride, and its own deeply ingrained sense of honor. But beneath this seemingly peaceful surface, fault lines are already forming. Kingdoms jostle for power, trade routes are contested, and minor squabbles frequently escalate into full-blown skirmishes. It's a land of high drama, where every handshake could be a prelude to betrayal, and every feast a powder keg waiting for a spark. You can almost hear the distant clang of bronze on bronze, the murmur of nervous whispers in market squares. At the very heart of this simmering tension is a concept that might feel a bit fantastical to your modern sensibilities, but back then it was as real as the ground beneath your feet. Prophecy. The future wasn't some foggy, unknowable expanse. It was a roadmap, albeit one often written in riddles and cloaked in ambiguity. Oracles, seers, and divinely inspired dreamers were the ancient world's weather forecasters, predicting storms of war and sunshine of prosperity, though often with a dramatic flair that would make today's news anchors blush. One such prophecy, whispered from the slopes of Mount Olympus itself, concerned a child yet unborn. This wasn't your average, you'll meet a tall, dark stranger prediction. This was a cosmic bombshell. You see, the great King Zeus, ruler of gods and mortals, had a bit of a wandering eye, and in this particular instance, his affections had fallen upon a sea nymph named Thetis. Now Thetis was, by all accounts, quite the catch, luminous, graceful, and possessed of a shimmering beauty that could outshine the morning sun. But here's the kicker. There was a prophecy, a rather inconvenient divine decree, that any son born to Thetis would be greater than his father. Think about that for a moment. Greater than Zeus. That's like saying your kid is going to invent a perpetual motion machine and solve cold fusion before kindergarten. Naturally, this put Zeus in a bit of a pickle. Being outshone by his own offspring wasn't exactly in his divine career plan. So, in a rather pragmatic display of celestial risk management, Thetis was hastily married off to a mortal king. Not just any mortal king, mind you, but Peleus, a decent enough chap, though perhaps a little bewildered by the attention from Olympus. This union, designed to circumvent a prophecy and maintain divine supremacy, inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that would unravel a civilization. It's almost ironic, isn't it? The gods, in their infinite wisdom, trying to avoid one problem, often just create a much bigger one down the line. It's a bit like trying to fix a leaky faucet with a garden hose. You mean well, but the result is usually a bigger mess. You can almost feel the gentle cosmic nudge pushing events forward. This marriage, intended to be a quiet solution, instead became the unlikely starting gun for the most famous conflict in ancient history. Imagine the whispers among the nymphs, the knowing glances exchanged by minor deities. Did you hear about Thetis and Peleus? Poor dear. all for the sake of avoiding a little divine competition. It's a subtle reminder that even omnipotent beings have their insecurities. Now, this marriage wasn't exactly a shotgun wedding, but it certainly had an air of divine expediency, and, as is custom with any self-respecting celestial union, a grand celebration was thrown. All the gods and goddesses were invited, a who's who of Olympus, dressed in their finest ethereal garments, ready to feast on ambrosia and nectar. This was the kind of party where the hors d'oeuvres glowed and the wine poured itself. Every deity worth their salt was there, from the stern-faced Hera to the eternally tipsy Dionysus, all except one. And that one omission, a seemingly minor oversight, would prove to be the single most disruptive guest not invited. This uninvited guest was Eris, the goddess of discord. Her name literally means strife. And let's be honest, she wasn't exactly known for her party planning skills or her ability to lighten the mood. You can picture her, lurking just outside the shimmering boundaries of the feast, her eyes glinting with a mischievous, almost petulant light. Perhaps she wasn't sent an invitation because, well, who invites discord to a wedding? That's like inviting a tax audit to your birthday party. Nobody wants that kind of trouble. But Eris, true to her nature, wasn't one to be ignored. Historians still argue whether Eris's exclusion was a genuine oversight or a deliberate snub by the other gods who just wanted one peaceful evening. Either way, her reaction was classic Eris. She decided to spice things up a bit. And by spice things up, I mean she planned to unleash a chain reaction of jealousy, vanity, and ultimately, war. Her chosen instrument, a golden apple. Not just any golden apple, mind you, but one inscribed with the simple, yet utterly devastating phrase, "To the fairest." This isn't some quaint story you read in a dusty old book. You're feeling the subtle tremor of fate as Eris, with a flick of her wrist, rolls this seemingly innocuous fruit into the midst of the feasting deities. It's a moment pregnant with possibility, a tiny, glittering seed of chaos planted right at the heart of divine harmony. You can almost hear the soft thud as it lands, followed by a momentary hush, then the rising clamor of voices as the goddesses spot the shimmering fruit and its tantalizing inscription. The air thickens with anticipation. Imagine the scene, the rich tapestries, the overflowing goblets, the laughter suddenly dying on immortal lips. Then, the inevitable. 3 goddesses in particular step forward, their eyes fixed on the golden prize. Hera, the queen of the gods, majestic and imperious. Athena, the wise and formidable goddess of war and wisdom. And Aphrodite, the radiant goddess of love and beauty. Each believed, with absolute certainty, that the apple was hers. This wasn't just about a beauty contest. It was about pride, status, and the subtle power dynamics within the Olympian family. Hera, as Zeus's wife, felt entitled to it. Athena, confident in her wisdom and formidable presence, surely deserved such a tribute. And Aphrodite, well, she was the goddess of beauty, so it was practically a given, right? The tension is palpable, the air crackling with divine ego. You can almost hear the silent internal debates, the subtle adjustments of posture, the practiced smiles. The other gods, sensing the impending disaster, quickly backed away, like guests at a party when an argument breaks out, and you just want to politely shuffle towards the exit. Even Zeus, for all his power, wasn't foolish enough to wade into this particular quagmire. This was a you break it, you buy it situation, and no deity wanted to be responsible for judging who among these three formidable ladies was the fairest. It's a lesson for all eternity. Never get between goddesses and a beauty pageant, especially when the prize is a golden apple. So, the stage is set. A divine wedding, an uninvited guest, a golden apple, and three incredibly powerful, incredibly vain goddesses. The seeds of discord, sown by a single, glittering fruit, are about to blossom into something far grander, far more devastating than anyone, mortal or immortal, could possibly foresee. You feel the gentle tug, pulling you deeper into the unfolding narrative, closer to the ancient shores where this conflict will ultimately erupt. The golden apple, you see, was like a hot potato, but with more potential for celestial drama. Zeus, ever the pragmatist when it came to avoiding direct conflict with his divine family, especially his wife Hera, who had a legendary temper, simply couldn't pick a winner. It was a no-win scenario. Choose Hera, and you'd incur the wrath of Athena and Aphrodite. Choose Athena, and Hera and Aphrodite would be furious. Choose Aphrodite, and well, you get the picture. It was a cosmic stalemate, and even the king of the gods knew when to delegate. So Zeus, with a twinkle in his all-seeing eye, decided to outsource the judging. He didn't pick a fellow god or goddess, which would have just shifted the problem. No, he chose a mortal, a young man living far from the Olympian squabbles, tending sheep on the slopes of Mount Ida, near the city of Troy. His name was Paris. Now, Paris wasn't just any shepherd, he was a prince, though he didn't know it yet. His parents were King Priam and Queen Hecuba of Troy, but a rather unsettling prophecy had foretold that he would be the downfall of their city. So, like a very extreme form of child protection services, he'd been sent away, raised by a shepherd, oblivious to his royal lineage. Imagine being told, much later in life, "Oh, by the way, you were supposed to bring ruin to your family, so we sent you to live with goats." Talk about an awkward family reunion. You can almost feel the fresh mountain air, hear the bleating of sheep, as Hermes, the messenger god, swoops down to Paris's idyllic pasture. Hermes, with his winged sandals and mischievous grin, probably enjoyed delivering this particular message. "Morning, Paris. Got a little task for you from the boss. Apparently, you're the chosen one to judge the most beautiful goddesses in all of Olympus. No pressure, though." You can picture Paris, rubbing sleep from his eyes, wondering if he'd had too much fermented goat's milk the night before. This was definitely not in the shepherd's handbook. So there you are, watching this bewildered young man as the three most powerful and beautiful goddesses in the cosmos appear before him. Imagine the scene, the shimmering light, the sudden hush, the sheer awe of it all. This isn't your local beauty pageant. This is the big leagues, with immortal stakes. And each goddess, true to form, tried to sweeten the deal, offering Paris bribes that would make even a modern-day politician blush. Hera, the queen, majestic and regal, offered him power. She promised him kingship over all of Asia, a dominion so vast it would make him the most powerful mortal on earth. "Choose me, Paris," she'd purr, her voice like distant thunder, "and you shall command armies, build empires, and bow to no one. It's an intoxicating offer, isn't it? The ultimate LinkedIn upgrade. Then came Athena, the fierce and intelligent goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. She offered him glory in battle and unparalleled wisdom. "With me by your side," she'd declare, her eyes sharp and clear, "you will be invincible in war. Your name will be etched into history, and your counsel will be unmatched." For a young man, the allure of being a legendary warrior, renowned for his intellect and prowess, must have been incredibly tempting. Forget viral videos. This was eternal fame. Finally, Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, approached him. She didn't offer power or glory. Instead, she offered him love. Specifically, she promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. "Choose me, sweet Paris," she'd whisper, her voice like honeyed silk, "and I will ensure that the most exquisite woman to ever walk the earth will fall madly in love with you and be yours." You can imagine the effect this had on a young, impressionable prince-turned-shepherd. In a world without dating apps, this was quite the hookup guarantee. Historians still argue whether Paris made his choice out of genuine desire, or if he was simply swayed by the most irresistible offer for a young man. Was it love at first sight, with the idea of Helen, or a shrewd calculation of what he truly valued? You see the flicker in his eyes, the almost imperceptible hesitation. Power, glory, or love? A classic dilemma, played out on a cosmic scale. And then he made his choice. Paris, after weighing the divine propositions, handed the golden apple to Aphrodite. The air crackled with a mix of triumph and seething resentment. Hera and Athena, their faces contorted with rage, vowed eternal vengeance on Paris, and by extension, his city, Troy. You can practically hear the indignant huffs and the quiet, dangerous promises of retribution. It's a prime example of how even small slights can balloon into monumental conflicts when immortal egos are involved. Aphrodite, naturally, was delighted. Her plan was coming together beautifully. She had promised Paris the most beautiful woman in the world, and there was only one woman who held that title: Helen of Sparta. Now, Helen wasn't just beautiful, she was legendary. Daughter of Zeus, yes, him again, always getting around. She was considered the epitome of mortal beauty, with a face that launched, well, rather a lot of ships, as we'll soon discover. She was, however, already married, and not just to anyone, but to King Menelaus of Sparta, a powerful and respected ruler, brother to the formidable Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, and arguably the most influential man in all of Greece. This wasn't some casual fling Aphrodite was arranging. This was about to be the biggest home-wrecking in ancient history. You can almost feel the gentle shift in the air, the subtle tightening of the threads of fate. The moment Paris gave that apple to Aphrodite, a cascade of events was set in motion. This wasn't just a beauty contest. It was the spark that would ignite a war lasting a decade, claiming countless lives and forever altering the course of ancient civilization. The innocent act of a shepherd judging goddesses would soon lead to the siege of a mighty city, all for the sake of a promise. It's a reminder that sometimes the smallest decisions can have the most enormous, unforeseen consequences. Perhaps that's why they say, be careful what you wish for, especially when dealing with deities who are prone to grand gestures. So, Paris, fresh from his divine beauty pageant gig, now had a mission: claim the world's most beautiful woman, Helen. Aphrodite, true to her word, was already working her magic. You feel the gentle current of destiny pulling Paris towards Sparta, the home of Menelaus, and, more importantly, Helen. He sailed not exactly under false pretenses, but certainly with a hidden agenda that would make any modern-day international incident look like a polite disagreement. He arrived in Sparta, a guest in Menelaus's palace. Now back then, hospitality was a big deal, like a really big deal. You opened your home, you fed your guests, you offered them a bath, no questions asked, no background checks needed. It was a sacred duty, a bond of trust that even the gods respected. Menelaus, being a good host and unaware of the cosmic mischief brewing, welcomed Paris with open arms. Feasts were held, wine flowed, and pleasantries were exchanged. You can almost hear the polite clinking of goblets, the murmur of conversation, utterly oblivious to the storm about to break. Helen, for her part, met Paris, and what happened next is where the story gets really juicy and where historians still argue whether it was true love, divine compulsion, or simply a scandalous elopement. Aphrodite's influence was undoubtedly powerful. Perhaps it was a love potion, a subtle enchantment, or simply the sheer magnetic charm of Paris, enhanced by a goddess's touch. Whatever the mechanism, Helen, wife of King Menelaus, found herself utterly smitten with the Trojan prince. You can almost picture it: the stolen glances across the banquet hall, the hushed conversations in moonlit courtyards, the growing, undeniable tension between them. It's a drama worthy of a modern soap opera, only with more flowing robes and less commercial breaks. Eventually, under the cloak of night, or perhaps in the dazzling light of day, when Menelaus was conveniently away, some versions say he left for Crete to attend a funeral, Helen made her choice. She left Sparta. She left her husband. She left her young daughter, Hermione, and she sailed away with Paris to Troy. This wasn't just a simple case of running away with a lover. This was a catastrophic breach of hospitality, a profound insult to Menelaus, and an act that would plunge the entire Greek world into war. Imagine the headlines: Royal Scandal Rocks Sparta, Queen elopes with foreign prince. The shockwaves would have been immense. It's akin to kidnapping the spouse of a powerful head of state in today's world, an act of war, plain and simple. When Menelaus returned to an empty palace, his beautiful wife and most of his portable treasures gone, yes, Paris also reportedly helped himself to a fair amount of Spartan gold, which makes the whole love story aspect a little less romantic and a lot more larcenous. His initial shock quickly morphed into incandescent fury. You can almost feel the temperature in the palace drop, the air crackling with his raw indignation. This wasn't just about a wife. It was about honor, reputation, and the sacred bond of hospitality that had been so brazenly shattered. Menelaus, though a king, wasn't powerful enough to take on Troy alone. He needed help. And where do you go for help when your wife has been stolen by a foreign prince and you need to launch a massive military expedition? You go to your big brother. His brother was Agamemnon, the mighty king of Mycenae, acknowledged as the most powerful ruler among the Achaeans. That's what the Greeks were called back then. Agamemnon was a formidable figure, a shrewd politician, and a ruthless military leader. He was, in essence, the supreme commander of the Greek forces, even before they were assembled. You can almost hear Menelaus's desperate plea, "Brother, my honor is stained. Troy has stolen my wife and my treasure. We must avenge this insult." Now, Agamemnon didn't necessarily leap at the chance to go to war just because his brother's wife had run off. Wars are expensive, risky, and a massive pain. But this was more than just a domestic squabble. An attack on Menelaus's honor was, in a way, an attack on the honor of all Greek kings, especially since Paris had violated the sacred laws of hospitality. Plus, Agamemnon likely saw an opportunity to consolidate his own power and prestige. A successful campaign against wealthy Troy would certainly boost his standing. It's a classic case of personal grievance aligning perfectly with political ambition. So, Agamemnon agreed. He invoked an ancient oath, sworn by all the prominent Greek heroes years earlier, promising to protect Helen's chosen husband. You see, Helen was such a prize that her father, Tyndareus, had made all her suitors swear an oath that if she was ever carried off, they would unite to retrieve her. It was the ancient equivalent of a prenuptial agreement, but with swords and shields. This oath, now activated by Paris's audacious act, provided the legal and moral framework for what would become the Trojan War. The call went out. Messengers were dispatched across the Greek lands, sailing to distant islands, riding to mountain strongholds. To arms, to Troy, for Menelaus and for honor. The rallying cry echoed from fertile plains to rugged coastlines. And you, a silent observer, watch as the machinery of war slowly, inexorably, grinds into motion. The Greek world, a collection of fiercely independent city-states, was now faced with a common cause, a shared enemy. This isn't just a story about love and betrayal. It's about the intricate web of ancient politics, the inviolable laws of hospitality, and the profound concept of honor that drove these ancient societies. Helen's elopement wasn't just a personal tragedy for Menelaus, it was a national affront, a declaration of disrespect that demanded a response of monumental scale. The stakes were incredibly high. Historians still debate whether Helen was a willing participant, genuinely in love with Paris, or if she was entirely under Aphrodite's irresistible sway. Was she a victim, a lovesick fool, or a shrewd player in a dangerous game? The ancient texts offer tantalizing hints, but no definitive answers. And so, the stage is set for the greatest military expedition of the ancient world. The abduction of Helen, whether by force or by charm, was the undeniable catalyst. Menelaus's fury, Agamemnon's ambition, and the ancient oath of the suitors all converged to ignite the flames of war. You can almost feel the tremor of thousands of warriors preparing for battle, the distant roar of the ocean carrying them towards their destiny. The fate of Troy, a city renowned for its wealth and its mighty walls, now hangs precariously in the balance, all because of a single, fateful decision made by a shepherd prince on a quiet mountainside. With the call to arms echoing across the Achaean lands, you find yourself watching as the legendary heroes of Greece, the very names whispered by bards for centuries, begin to stir. This wasn't some ragtag militia. This was an all-star team of demigods, mighty kings, and cunning strategists, each with their own unique quirks, and often a healthy dose of divine parentage. Agamemnon, the big boss, had sent out the summons, and the response, while not always immediate or enthusiastic, was ultimately undeniable. First, there's Achilles, the undisputed greatest warrior of his age, son of the sea nymph Thetis. Remember that divine prophecy from Section 1? He was practically invincible, save for one tiny spot on his heel. You can imagine him, young, fiery, brimming with unspent glory, initially reluctant to join this distant war. His mother, knowing his destiny was intertwined with this conflict, tried to hide him away, dressing him as a girl on the island of Syros. It's a quirky tidbit, isn't it? The most fearsome warrior in history, cross-dressing to avoid military service. You can almost hear the chuckles from the gods watching this unfold. Of course, the ever-cunning Odysseus eventually sniffed him out, using a clever trick involving weapons and jewelry. Odysseus, ever the pragmatist, probably thought, "Look, we need Achilles. A little drag isn't going to stop this war." Then there's Odysseus himself, king of Ithaca, not known for his brute strength, but for his sharp mind, his silver tongue, and his endless capacity for stratagem. He was so keen to avoid the war, so desperate to stay with his beloved wife Penelope and young son Telemachus, that he feigned madness. You might see him ploughing his fields with an ox and a donkey yoked together, sowing salt instead of seeds, hoping to convince the recruiters he was utterly bonkers. But Agamemnon's emissaries, particularly the shrewd Palamedes, weren't fooled. Palamedes placed Odysseus's infant son in the path of the plough. Odysseus naturally swerved, revealing his sanity and his true identity. You feel the immediate surge of admiration for his cunning, and perhaps a pang of sympathy for the lengths he went to avoid the call to duty. And let's not forget Ajax the Greater, a mountain of a man, second only to Achilles in fighting prowess, though perhaps a little less subtle. He was all brawn and unwavering loyalty, a human battering ram. He was the kind of guy you definitely wanted on your side in a brawl, but perhaps not in a debate club. Then there was Diomedes, another formidable warrior, skilled and courageous, who would perform heroic feats throughout the war. You also have Nestor, the wise old king, whose counsel was invaluable, though his speeches sometimes ran a bit long. He was the ancient world's version of a revered, slightly verbose elder statesman. Each hero, in their own way, was eventually persuaded or compelled to join. Some came for honor, some for loot, some simply because an oath was an oath, and defying Agamemnon was rarely a good idea. The gathering of this fleet was an unprecedented logistical nightmare. Imagine thousands of ships, each built by hand, converging from dozens of independent kingdoms, filled with warriors who often had their own agendas and rivalries. It was less like a unified army and more like a very large, heavily armed flash mob, all heading in roughly the same direction. The rendezvous point was Aulis, a coastal town in Boeotia. Here, the sheer scale of the undertaking becomes clear to you. Picture the harbor, bristling with masts like a forest of pines, the shore crowded with tens of thousands of armed men, their bronze armor glinting in the sun, their voices a cacophony of dialects. This was the largest expeditionary force ever assembled in the Greek world, a truly monumental effort that stretched the resources and patience of every participating kingdom. Modern militaries plan for years to deploy a fraction of this force, and these guys did it with papyrus and a whole lot of shouting. Historians still argue whether the Greeks had a truly unified command structure or if it was more of a loose confederation under Agamemnon's somewhat shaky authority. You can imagine the ego clashes, the minor kings squabbling over who got the best mooring spots, who got to lead the vanguard, whose sacrifices to the gods were more impressive. It's like herding cats, but the cats have swords and divine backing. Agamemnon, for all his power, had his work cut out for him, simply keeping this volatile collection of heroes pointed in the same direction. The sheer mass of men and ships, the supplies needed to feed and equip them, the logistics of coordinating so many independent forces, it must have been a monumental task. You can almost smell the sweat and the dust, hear the rhythmic chant of rowers, the creak of timber. This wasn't just a military campaign, it was a societal migration. Every corner of Greece was contributing, sending its finest, its bravest, and its most expendable. The narrative of assembling this massive force isn't just about famous names. It's about the very fabric of Greek society being mobilized. Every hero brought his own retinue, his own ships, his own particular brand of fighting. This was an era where personal glory was paramount, where a hero's reputation was built on his individual prowess in battle. So, while they were united under Agamemnon, there was always that underlying competitive spirit, that desire to be the best, to outshine even your allies. The anticipation must have been immense. Weeks, perhaps months, were spent gathering, preparing, and making the necessary sacrifices to the gods for a safe voyage and a successful campaign. The target? Troy, a city rumored to be impregnable, protected by colossal walls and a formidable army. You feel the collective anxiety mixed with the fervent hope for glory and riches. This wasn't just about getting Helen back. It was about proving Greek might, asserting dominance, and claiming the legendary wealth of Troy. The stakes for everyone involved were incredibly high. So there you are, amidst the teeming thousands at Aulis, ships bobbing impatiently in the harbor, warriors itching for glory, and the air thick with anticipation. Everything is ready, or so it seems. But then, a problem arises, a big problem. The winds, which should have been fair and strong, are stubbornly absent. Day after day, week after week, the mighty Achaean fleet remains becalmed, trapped in the harbor by an unyielding calm. The sun beats down, the provisions dwindle, and the morale of the vast army begins to plummet. You can practically hear the frustrated murmurs ripple through the ranks, the growing unease among the leaders. This wasn't just bad weather. This felt deliberate. Agamemnon, the exasperated commander-in-chief, consults his seers, his augurs, anyone who might have a hotline to the divine. And the news isn't good. The great prophet Calchas, after much consultation with omens and entrails, delivers the grim message. The goddess Artemis is offended, deeply offended. Why Artemis, you ask? Well, there are a couple of theories floating around in the ancient whispers. One popular story is that Agamemnon, in a moment of arrogance, or perhaps just terrible aim, had boasted about his hunting prowess, claiming to be better than Artemis herself, or, in a slightly more bizarre turn of events, he had killed a sacred deer in her grove. Either way, you don't mess with the goddess of the hunt. It's like accidentally unplugging a deity's Wi-Fi router. There will be consequences. And the consequence, as delivered by Calchas, was truly horrific. To appease Artemis and earn fair winds, Agamemnon had to sacrifice his own daughter, the young and innocent Iphigenia. You feel a chill run down your spine. This isn't just a quirky tidbit, it's a mainstream historical fact, albeit one steeped in myth, that highlights the brutal realities and desperate measures of the ancient world. Imagine the horror of it. Agamemnon, a father, faced with an impossible choice: sacrifice his child or doom his entire expedition, risking rebellion and eternal shame. It's the stuff of nightmares, a moral quandary so agonizing it still resonates today. Agamemnon, as you can imagine, was torn. His queen, Clytemnestra, would never agree. So, with Odysseus's cunning advice, because of course Odysseus was involved in the trickery, they devised a cruel ruse. A message was sent to Clytemnestra, telling her to bring Iphigenia to Aulis, ostensibly to marry the great Achilles. You can picture Achilles' bewildered reaction to this news, perhaps a faint blush of indignation. Marry my daughter? She's practically a child, and I didn't even propose. Historians still argue whether Achilles was truly deceived or if he was a reluctant participant in this grim deception. The ancient texts are a bit fuzzy on his exact level of complicity. Clytemnestra, overjoyed at the prospect of her daughter marrying the greatest hero of the age, brought Iphigenia to Aulis, brimming with maternal pride and excitement. And then, the terrible truth was revealed. You can almost feel the air go silent, the joyous anticipation turning to icy dread as Iphigenia realizes her fate. The cries of a young girl, the pleas of a horrified mother, echoing through the silent, expectant ranks of the assembled army. It's a moment of profound tragedy, a stark reminder of the immense cost of war, even before the first arrow had been loosed at Troy. This sacrificial moment, though grim, serves a crucial purpose in the narrative. It underscores the overwhelming power of the gods, the brutal lengths to which mortals would go to appease them, and the immense pressure placed on the Achaean leaders. It also sows the seeds of future tragedy within Agamemnon's own family, a silent promise of vengeance from a mother whose child was cruelly taken. Remember Clytemnestra, her story isn't over yet. And just as the knife was poised, or perhaps right after the deed was done, depending on which version of the myth you prefer, a miracle occurred. Some stories say Artemis, mollified by the sacrifice, or perhaps taking pity on Iphigenia, spirited her away at the last moment, replacing her with a deer on the altar. Iphigenia, in this version, was saved and taken to serve the goddess in Taurus. Others say the sacrifice was indeed carried out, a grim reality that fueled Clytemnestra's enduring hatred. Either way, the immediate consequence was clear. The winds stirred. You feel the gentle breeze pick up, then strengthen, rustling the sails, whipping the pennants atop the masts. A collective sigh of relief, perhaps even a cheer, rises from the waiting army. The sacrifice, whatever its true nature, had worked. Artemis was appeased. The way to Troy was finally clear. The seemingly insurmountable obstacle had been overcome, but at a profound, almost unbearable cost. The delay at Aulis wasn't just a plot device, it was a psychological crucible for the Achaean army. Weeks of idleness, of watching their provisions dwindle and their eagerness turn to despair, would have tested the patience of any fighting force. The Iphigenia incident, whether historically true or a powerful mythological explanation, provides a chilling illustration of the kind of extreme measures considered acceptable in a world governed by divine will and unwavering omens. It reinforces the idea that the ancient Greeks believed the gods played a very active, often capricious role in their lives. With the wind now at their backs, the enormous fleet finally set sail. Imagine the spectacle: thousands of ships, their oars dipping in unison, their sails unfurled, catching the eager breeze. The sound of their departure would have been immense. The creak of timber, the slap of waves, the rhythmic chant of rowers, the shouts of commanders, and the collective roar of an army finally on the move. They cut across the azure waters of the Aegean, a vast armada aimed squarely at the formidable walls of Troy, a city they had never seen but whose very name now symbolized their ultimate purpose. You are carried along with them, a silent passenger on this epical voyage, feeling the spray of the sea and the immense sense of purpose driving them forward. The stage for the greatest war of antiquity is finally set, the curtain slowly rising as the fleet sails towards its destiny. You've sailed for what feels like an eternity, the vast expanse of the Aegean Sea stretching out before you, the rhythmic dip of oars a constant lullaby. The initial excitement of departure has settled into a weary anticipation. The Greek fleet, a bronze-clad behemoth, finally sights land. Not just any land, but the plains of Troy. You can almost feel the collective surge of adrenaline through the armada, the whispered, "There it is," rippling from ship to ship. But landing a massive army on a hostile shore isn't as simple as pulling up to a dock. The Trojans, not entirely oblivious to the giant flotilla heading their way, were ready. They had their own formidable heroes, led by the noble and mighty Hector, eldest son of King Priam, and the undisputed champion of Troy. He was their shield, their bulwark against the invading tide. The first attempts at landing were met with fierce resistance. You can picture the chaos, the creak of gangplanks, the splash of warriors leaping into the surf, the whiz of arrows, and the clash of bronze as the Trojans valiantly defended their homeland. This wasn't a clean, organized invasion. It was a desperate beach assault, messy and bloody. Now, a bit of a quirky tidbit here. There was an ancient prophecy concerning the first Greek to set foot on Trojan soil. It foretold that this warrior would be the first to die. Naturally, none of the great heroes were eager to be the first to fulfill this grim prophecy. You can imagine them all hesitating at the prow of their ships, eyeing each other, perhaps even feigning a sudden need to tie their sandals. But then, a quick-witted hero named Protesilaus, either bravely or foolishly, leaped ashore. He cut down a few Trojans before Hector himself struck him down, fulfilling the prophecy. A grim start, indeed. His wife, Laodamia, was so grief-stricken that the gods, in a moment of unusual pity, allowed her husband to return from the underworld for just 3 hours. She then made a statue of him, which she promptly burned herself alive with, because ancient Greek love stories rarely ended with happily ever after, and almost always involved pyres. With the beachhead secured, the Greeks established their camp. This wasn't a temporary stop, it was a sprawling, fortified city in itself, stretching along the coast, a formidable base for a prolonged siege. You can almost hear the hammering of stakes, the shouts of men digging trenches, the constant buzz of activity as they prepared for the long haul. This was to be their home for the next decade. Think about that for a moment. 10 years. Imagine camping out for 10 years, far from home, constantly on edge. The immediate goal was, of course, to take the city of Troy. But Troy was no pushover. Its walls were legendary, massive fortifications built. So the myths claimed, with the help of the gods Poseidon and Apollo. They were thought to be impregnable, a silent, stony defiance against any invader. And behind those walls lived a courageous and resilient people, led by King Priam and his sons, fiercely determined to protect their home and their families. You can almost feel the weight of those walls, the sense of security they provided to the Trojans, and the crushing frustration they represented to the Greeks. The initial engagements were fierce, but inconclusive. The Greeks made several attempts to storm the city, but the Trojan defenses held firm, reinforced by their powerful allies who flocked to their aid from across Asia Minor. It was a stalemate from the get-go. This wasn't going to be a quick, decisive victory. This was going to be a grind, a war of attrition. One mainstream historical fact to consider: while the stories are filled with gods and heroes, archaeological evidence suggests that Troy, specifically the layer known as Troy 7a, was indeed a fortified city that experienced destruction around the conventionally accepted time of the Trojan War, roughly 12th century BCE. Whether it was the result of a protracted siege, an earthquake, or internal strife is part of the ongoing scholarly debate. But the existence of a strong, wealthy city at that location is not disputed. Historians still argue whether the war was a single, massive conflict or a series of smaller raids and skirmishes that evolved into the grand epic we know today. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the initial fervor began to wane. The Greeks realized they couldn't simply batter down Troy's walls. Instead, they resorted to raiding the surrounding countryside, capturing smaller towns, plundering resources, and enslaving people to sustain their massive army. This was how they fed themselves, how they gained riches, and how they kept their warriors busy and motivated. You can imagine the plight of the innocent civilians in these smaller settlements, caught between the two warring giants, their lives upended by a conflict that wasn't even their own. So, the stage was set for a long, drawn-out conflict. The initial landings were complete, the camp was established, and the reality of the formidable Trojan defenses had sunk in. The Greeks were here to stay, entrenched in a long, bloody siege. You feel the heavy weight of the passage of time, the growing weariness, and the stark realization that this was not just a battle, but a decade-long commitment. The war had truly begun, a slow, grinding struggle against a resilient foe, with the formidable walls of Troy looming silently in the distance, a constant reminder of the monumental task ahead. You are now firmly settled into the monotonous, grinding reality of a long siege. The initial fervor and grand aspirations of the Greek army have, by this point, been replaced by the dull ache of routine. Imagine 10 years of the same dust, the same cramped camp, the same distant view of Troy's impenetrable walls. It's a bit like an eternal camping trip, only instead of s'mores, you get skirmishes, and instead of campfire songs, you get the cries of the wounded. The early years of the siege were, frankly, uneventful in terms of storming the city. The Trojans were too well defended, their walls too strong, their defenders too fierce. So, what did the Greeks do? They raided. Oh, did they raid? They launched expeditions to surrounding cities and islands, not just for provisions, but for plunder, for slaves, and for new prizes of war. This was how they sustained themselves, how they kept their warriors from mutiny, and how they accumulated wealth. Think of it as a very aggressive, prolonged shopping spree, where the items on your list included livestock, precious metals, and unfortunate civilians. These raids, though often brutal, are a crucial part of the story. They provided the logistical backbone for the massive Greek army. You can picture it, a detachment of warriors, perhaps led by a hero like Achilles or Ajax, sailing to a nearby town, overwhelming its defenses, and returning to the camp laden with spoils. It was a cycle of violence and acquisition that kept the war machine churning. This is a mainstream historical fact too. Ancient armies often supported themselves through raiding and pillaging, especially in extended campaigns. Supply lines, as we know them today, were a bit more rustic. During one of these raiding expeditions, a particularly significant event occurred, one that would spark a major internal conflict within the Greek ranks. On a raid against the city of Lyrnessus, Achilles captured two beautiful women, Chryseis and Briseis. Chryseis was given to Agamemnon, the supreme commander, as a prize of war. Briseis became Achilles' own, a cherished companion, perhaps even more than just a spoil of war. You can almost feel the simmering resentment among the other warriors. Achilles always getting the best spoils, always the most renown. It's like being on a team project where one person consistently does all the impressive work and gets all the credit. Life in the Greek camp during these long, uneventful years was a strange mix of boredom and sudden, brutal violence. There were periods of relative calm, punctuated by fierce skirmishes outside the walls, duels between heroes, and the occasional Trojan sally. The warriors would hone their skills, listen to bards sing of past glories, and perhaps future ones, and gamble away their meager earnings. There was also a significant amount of squabbling and politicking among the Greek leaders, as you might expect when a group of powerful, ambitious men are stuck together for years. A quirky tidbit: to pass the time, and perhaps to maintain some semblance of order, the Greeks likely developed a rather sophisticated system of entertainment and leisure within their vast camp. Imagine impromptu wrestling matches, foot races, and even storytelling competitions. It wasn't all grim-faced fighting. There were moments of camaraderie, even fleeting joy. Perhaps they even had an early version of a mess hall talent show. Historians still argue whether the Greek camp was a tightly disciplined military machine or a more loosely organized confederation of tribal armies. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, adapting over time. But lurking beneath the surface of this monotonous existence was a growing sense of weariness, a creeping doubt. 10 years is a long time. Homes were left, families grieved, and the initial fervor of vengeance slowly began to fade. The walls of Troy remained defiant, a constant, mocking presence. The sheer scale of the undertaking and the lack of decisive progress must have weighed heavily on everyone. You can almost hear the low hum of resignation, the quiet longing for home, mingling with the ambitious whispers of glory. This wasn't just a war, it was an endurance test, a decade-long exercise in patience and perseverance, and the patience of some of the key players was about to snap. You felt the slow, dull drag of the long siege, the relentless monotony broken only by raids and minor skirmishes. But now, as the story unfolds, you're about to witness the spark that ignites a much greater fire within the Greek camp, a feud that nearly unravels the entire expedition. This isn't about gods or Trojans. This is about two powerful men, their egos, and a prize of war. Remember Chryseis, the beautiful woman captured by Achilles and given to Agamemnon? Well, her father, Chryses, was a priest of Apollo, and he, quite understandably, wanted his daughter back. He came to the Greek camp bearing rich ransom, pleading for her return. You can almost see him, an old man, dignified and desperate, approaching the mighty leaders. But Agamemnon, ever proud and a bit arrogant, refused. He publicly humiliated the priest, sending him away empty-handed. This was a colossal mistake. Chryses, heartbroken and furious, prayed to his patron god, Apollo. And Apollo, as you know, is not a deity to be trifled with. He heard his priest's prayer and descended from Olympus, radiating divine wrath. He began to loose arrows, not of bronze, but of pestilence, upon the Greek camp. A terrible plague swept through the army. Men began to sicken and die by the hundreds, their funeral pyres burning day and night, filling the air with the stench of death. You feel the dread creeping through the camp. The warriors, once strong and eager for battle, now cough and waste away. The gods, it seems, were actively punishing them. So, again, the prophet Calchas was consulted, and once again, he delivered an uncomfortable truth. The plague was Apollo's doing, and it would not cease until Chryseis was returned to her father without ransom. This revelation, delivered in a public assembly, put Agamemnon in an impossible position. He had to return Chryseis, but he was unwilling to lose face, unwilling to let go of his prize without something in return. And that's where his eyes, full of resentment, landed on Achilles. "If I must give up Chryseis," Agamemnon declared, his voice probably dripping with aggrieved self-pity, "then I will take your prize, Achilles. I will take Briseis." And just like that, the air crackled. You can practically hear the collective gasp from the assembled heroes. This wasn't just about a woman. This was a direct challenge to Achilles' honor, a public humiliation, a stripping away of his hard-won prestige. It was an insult so profound, it threatened to shatter the very foundation of the Greek expedition. Achilles, the greatest warrior, the practically invincible demigod, was absolutely incandescent with rage. You can almost feel the heat radiating off him, the way his hand instinctively goes to his sword. He felt utterly betrayed, disrespected by his own commander. "You want to strip me of my prize," he might have roared, "after all my toil, all my victories? What kind of king are you? We came here for your honor, not to be humiliated by you." For a moment, it looked like Achilles would draw his sword and strike down Agamemnon right there, ending the war before it truly began, or at least creating a very bloody leadership vacuum. But then, a quirky or fringe tidbit, the goddess Athena, always a fan of Achilles and perhaps sent by Hera, who enjoyed seeing Agamemnon squirm, appeared to Achilles, visible only to him. She grabbed his hair, a very undignified way for a goddess to intervene, and told him to sheath his sword, to use words instead of steel, promising that his grievances would be repaid threefold. Achilles, still seething, reluctantly obeyed, but his words were as sharp as any blade. He denounced Agamemnon, calling him greedy, cowardly, and unfit to lead, and then he made a momentous declaration. "I will not fight, not for you, not for your honor, not for this war. I will withdraw my Myrmidons, my elite warriors, and my ships, and we will sit by the sea, watching while you flounder." This was devastating. Imagine the best player on your team, the undisputed MVP, suddenly declaring he's sitting out the championship game because of a spat with the coach. The implications were immediate and catastrophic. Without Achilles and his fierce Myrmidons, the Greek army was suddenly much weaker, their morale shattered. Agamemnon, despite the insult, followed through. Chryseis was returned. Briseis was taken from Achilles' tent by Agamemnon's heralds. You see the scene. Achilles, watching her go, tears of frustration and wounded pride streaming down his face. This was not the Achilles we typically imagine, roaring on the battlefield. This was a man deeply hurt, profoundly angered, and resolute in his decision. His mother Thetis, hearing his lament, rose from the sea. Achilles begged her to intercede with Zeus, to punish the Achaeans for Agamemnon's disrespect, to ensure that the Greeks would suffer defeat, until they begged him to return to battle, recognizing his indispensable value. And Thetis, doting mother that she was, agreed. Historians still argue whether Achilles' withdrawal was a genuine act of principle or a calculated power play. Was he truly so offended by the slight, or was he leveraging his indispensable value to assert his dominance over Agamemnon? The ancient texts often portray him as deeply principled, but also immensely proud and stubborn. You feel the tension, the sheer weight of this decision on the entire expedition. The main strength of the Greek army, their fiercest champion, was now sidelined, stewing in his tent. The war, already a long and arduous slog, was about to get much, much worse for the Achaeans. You feel the sudden, jarring shift in the tide of war. With Achilles and his formidable Myrmidons withdrawn from the fighting, a palpable weakness descends upon the Achaean lines. It's like a massive sports team losing their star player just before the big game. Only this game involves real swords and very permanent injuries. The Trojans, initially cautious, begin to sense this shift. Their greatest champion, Hector, sees an opportunity, and he seizes it with both hands. Suddenly, the battlefield, which for years had seen a relatively even back and forth, becomes a scene of growing Greek despair. The Trojans, invigorated by Achilles' absence, push harder, bolder. Hector leads the charge, his bronze helmet gleaming, his spear flashing. He is a truly magnificent warrior, embodying the courage and resilience of Troy. You can almost hear his rallying cries, inspiring his men to unimaginable feats. He's not fighting for plunder or glory in the same way some of the Greeks are. He's fighting for his city, his family, his people. This dedication makes him an even more formidable foe. The battles become increasingly intense, raging closer and closer to the Greek camp, to their ships. You watch as Greek heroes, once so confident, begin to fall. The tide of war is unmistakably turning. The Achaean morale, already worn thin by years of siege, begins to crack. Fear and desperation creep into the hearts of even the bravest warriors. Imagine being on the defensive, constantly pushed back, seeing your comrades fall, knowing that the man who could turn the tide is stubbornly refusing to help. It's a soul-crushing experience. Agamemnon, for all his stubborn pride, begins to feel the immense pressure. He sees his army crumbling, his ships threatened, and his entire expedition teetering on the brink of disaster. The gods, at Achilles' mother's request, are actively intervening on the Trojan side, ensuring Greek suffering. You can almost see Zeus on Olympus, tipping the scales of battle just enough to favor the Trojans, a stern reminder of Achilles' importance. In his desperation, Agamemnon finally, reluctantly, swallows his pride. He sends a delegation to Achilles' tent, a group of the most respected Greek heroes, the wise Odysseus, the formidable Ajax, and the venerable Phoenix, Achilles' old mentor. They bring with them a magnificent offer of reconciliation, vast treasures, captured cities, even the return of Briseis, untouched, and with a solemn oath that Agamemnon never laid a hand on her. He even offers one of his own daughters in marriage. It's a king's apology, a grand gesture designed to appeal to Achilles' honor and his greed. You are there, a silent witness to this pivotal meeting in Achilles' tent. The air is thick with tension. Odysseus speaks first, eloquent and persuasive, painting a grim picture of the Greek plight and appealing to Achilles' sense of duty. Ajax, less articulate but powerful in his sincerity, appeals to Achilles' loyalty to his comrades, his shame at abandoning them. Phoenix, with tears in his eyes, tells a long cautionary tale, reminding Achilles of his responsibilities and the fleeting nature of life. But Achilles, still nursing his deep wound, is unmoved. His pride is monumental, his anger a cold, unyielding fire. He rejects Agamemnon's offer, stating that no amount of gold or women could compensate for the insult to his honor. He declares his intention to sail home, to live a long, inglorious life rather than die gloriously for a king who had wronged him so grievously. He's essentially saying, "You can't put a price on my dignity, and you certainly can't buy me back with the very things you stole from me." This rejection is a major turning point. The Greek leaders return to Agamemnon, their faces grim, their hopes dashed. The morale of the army sinks even lower. The Trojans, meanwhile, emboldened by their successes and the perceived disarray among the Achaeans, press their advantage relentlessly. The battles continue to rage, and the Greeks are pushed further and further back. The Trojans breach the Greek defenses, even reaching the ships, threatening to set them ablaze. You can almost smell the smoke, hear the desperate cries of the Greek warriors as they fight to protect their only way home. It's a scene of utter chaos and near defeat. The situation is dire, a clear indication of how indispensable Achilles truly was. Historians still argue whether Achilles' refusal was justified or whether it showed a selfish disregard for the lives of his comrades. Was his pride a tragic flaw or a necessary component of his heroic stature? The answer, like most things in this epic, is complex and depends on your perspective. What is clear is that his absence created a gaping wound in the Greek forces, allowing Hector to ascend to his zenith of power and glory. The war for the Greeks had become a desperate struggle for survival, a testament to their own resilience, but also to the crippling cost of internal strife. You're standing on the precipice of desperation with the Greek army. The Trojans, under Hector's brilliant leadership, are not just winning, they are dominating. The battle lines have shifted dramatically, pushing the Achaeans back, until the very ships that carried them across the Aegean are now directly under threat. Imagine the terror, your only escape route, your very means of returning home, about to be consumed by flames. The situation is dire, truly dire. Agamemnon, Menelaus, Odysseus, Diomedes, all the great Greek heroes are wounded, weary, or simply overwhelmed. They are fighting valiantly, but the tide is against them. You can almost feel the choking smoke from the fires the Trojans have started. The roar of the Trojan War cries, the desperate clanging of bronze as the Greeks fight for their very survival on the narrow strip of beach. Achilles, meanwhile, is still sulking in his tent. He watches the battle from afar, perhaps from a slight rise, a conflicted expression on his face. You can feel his internal struggle, the burning rage at Agamemnon, but also the deep loyalty to his comrades, the pang of guilt as he sees his friends suffering and dying. It's a powerful moment of human emotion, even for a demigod. It is during this moment of extreme crisis that Patroclus, Achilles' closest friend and companion, steps forward. Patroclus wasn't just a friend. He was almost like a brother to Achilles, someone who could soften the great warrior's fierce temperament. You can see his genuine concern, his compassion for the suffering Greeks. He can no longer stand idly by. Patroclus approaches Achilles, tears streaming down his face, begging him to return to battle, or at least to let him go. He proposes a desperate plan. If Achilles won't fight, let Patroclus wear Achilles' distinctive armor, the magnificent gleaming panoply that strikes fear into the hearts of the Trojans. "Let me go," Patroclus pleads. "Let me wear your armor. The Trojans will think it is you, and they will retreat, giving the Greeks a much-needed respite." Achilles, after much persuasion, agrees, but he gives Patroclus strict instructions, a crucial warning. Drive the Trojans back from the ships, but do not pursue them to the walls of Troy. That glory, Achilles states, perhaps with a touch of possessiveness, is reserved for me. You can feel the weight of this warning, a subtle foreshadowing of the tragedy to come. It's like telling a kid not to touch the giant, flashing red button that says, "Do not press." Patroclus dons Achilles' armor. Imagine the sight, the renowned, almost mythical armor, now worn by someone else, but still radiating the aura of the greatest warrior. As Patroclus leaps into the fray, a sudden electric shock goes through both armies. The Trojans, seeing the familiar, terrifying armor, panic. Achilles has returned, they cry, and their advance falters, turns into a panicked retreat. You can almost hear their collective sigh of dread, their courage suddenly draining away. Patroclus, empowered by the armor and by his own courage, fights like a true hero. He slaughters Trojans by the dozens, driving them back from the ships, saving the Greek fleet from destruction. He's incredibly effective, a whirlwind of destruction. It's a truly heroic performance, a testament to his own prowess, not just the armor he wears. A quirky tidbit: some ancient sources suggest that Patroclus was actually older than Achilles, or at least his senior, in a mentor-like capacity. This adds another layer to their relationship, making Achilles' refusal to fight and Patroclus' compassionate intervention even more poignant. It was less about a younger protege trying to impress, and more about a dedicated comrade taking a desperate gamble. Historians still argue about the precise nature of Achilles and Patroclus' relationship, whether it was purely a deep friendship or something more romantic, but their bond was undeniably central to the epic. But Patroclus, caught up in the thrill of victory, forgets Achilles' warning. He pursues the retreating Trojans all the way to the gates of Troy, seeking to take the city itself. He even manages to kill Sarpedon, a powerful Trojan ally and a son of Zeus, an act that further infuriates the gods. This overreach seals his fate. The gods, particularly Apollo, who was still subtly favoring the Trojans, intervene. Apollo strikes Patroclus, disorienting him, perhaps even knocking off his helmet. And then Hector, the great Trojan champion, sees his opportunity. He engages Patroclus in single combat, and with a final, crushing blow, Hector kills Patroclus. You feel the gut-wrenching impact of that moment. Patroclus falls, stripped of Achilles' armor, his lifeblood spilling onto the plains of Troy. It's a truly tragic scene, the ultimate sacrifice, and the direct consequence of Achilles' stubborn pride and Patroclus' overzealous bravery. Hector, victorious, strips the magnificent armor from Patroclus' body, claiming it as his own spoil of war. The news of Patroclus' death, carried back to the Greek camp, hits Achilles like a physical blow. You feel his scream, a primal, earth-shattering howl of grief and despair. The loss of his beloved friend, and the realization that his own pride had indirectly led to this tragedy, shatters his aloofness, transforms his anger at Agamemnon into an all-consuming, terrifying thirst for vengeance. The Achilles we knew, withdrawn and sullen, is gone. In his place rises a force of nature, driven by an unholy grief. You felt the raw, primal scream of Achilles when the news of Patroclus' death reached him. It wasn't just a cry of grief, it was the sound of a world shattering, of a man consumed by an agony so profound it transforms him. His self-imposed exile, his petty quarrel with Agamemnon, all of it evaporates in the searing heat of his sorrow and his monumental thirst for vengeance. The Achilles you saw sulking in his tent, nursing his pride, is gone. In his place emerges a terrifying, unstoppable force of nature, driven by a singular purpose: to avenge Patroclus and to kill Hector. His mother, the sea nymph Thetis, hearing his cries even from the depths of the ocean, rises to console him. She finds him covered in dust, weeping, vowing bloody revenge. He declares that he will not rest until Hector is dead, even if it means his own prophesied death will follow soon after. This is a mainstream historical fact in the mythological narrative. Achilles knew his fate was tied to Troy, that killing Hector would inevitably lead to his own demise. He chose vengeance over a long life, a stark illustration of the ancient heroic code. But there's a problem. Hector has stripped Patroclus of Achilles' magnificent armor. So, Achilles is left unarmed, vulnerable, and furious. Thetis, ever the devoted mother, promises to acquire new armor for him, armor crafted by the gods themselves. She journeys to the forge of Hephaestus, the divine smith, the god of fire and craftsmanship. Imagine the glow of that divine forge, the rhythmic clang of the hammer on celestial metal, the shimmering heat. Hephaestus, a masterful artisan, creates a shield unlike any other, one intricately decorated with scenes of peace and war, of daily life and cosmic order. This is a quirky tidbit. The detailed description of Achilles' shield in the Iliad is one of the most famous literary passages in history, a microcosm of the entire ancient world depicted on a single piece of armor. It's almost as if the universe itself is contained within this one defensive object. Hephaestus also fashions a helmet, a breastplate, and greaves, all imbued with divine power. While the new armor is being made, the Greeks, particularly Agamemnon, are reeling from the combined losses and the terrifying implications of Achilles' grief. You feel the palpable shift in the camp, a renewed sense of dread, but also a burgeoning hope. Because if Achilles was angry before, now he is utterly unleashed, a weapon of mass destruction aimed directly at Troy. When Thetis returns, presenting Achilles with his new, gleaming, divinely crafted armor, you witness the transformation. He puts on the armor, and it's as if a fire ignites within him. His eyes blaze, his body shimmers with unholy might. He is no longer just a man. He is the embodiment of wrath, a force of vengeance, a walking storm. He then, with a terrifying intensity, makes amends with Agamemnon. The old quarrel, the insult, the stolen Briseis, all of it now seems trivial, overshadowed by the immense grief and rage for Patroclus. Agamemnon, for his part, publicly apologizes, returns Briseis, untouched as promised, and offers the treasures he had originally withheld. The reconciliation is swift, driven by the urgency of the moment and the overwhelming presence of the enraged Achilles. The entire Greek army witnesses this momentous event, feeling the renewed sense of purpose, but also a shiver of fear at the fury they now see in their greatest warrior. Achilles, his anger now directed solely at the Trojans, leaps into battle. You feel the earth tremble as he charges, a single, furious figure, tearing through the Trojan ranks. He's not fighting strategically, he's fighting to kill, to annihilate. His new spear, heavy and deadly, flashes like lightning. Trojans fall before him like wheat before a scythe. He even battles the river god Scamander, who rises up in fury to try and stop his slaughter, a surreal and vivid reminder of the direct involvement of the gods in this conflict. It's chaos, pure, unadulterated, and terrifying. The focus shifts entirely to Achilles' rampage. He is utterly relentless, pursuing Trojans without mercy, driven by a grief so profound it manifests as unstoppable destruction. You can hear the screams of the dying, the frantic shouts of the survivors. The Trojans, who had been so dominant just moments before, are now in full, desperate flight, utterly demoralized by the sudden, terrifying return of Achilles. Hector, observing this carnage from within the city walls, knows that the ultimate confrontation is inevitable. He is the one who killed Patroclus, and he is the one whom Achilles seeks. Historians still argue whether Hector's decision to remain outside the city walls rather than retreat to safety was an act of profound courage, a tragic error in judgment, or a divinely ordained destiny. He knows his fate, but he is determined to face it, to protect his city to the very end. The stage is set for the epic duel, the climactic showdown that everyone, mortal and immortal, has been waiting for. You are now at the very precipice of the most anticipated moment of the Trojan War, the duel between the greatest warriors of Greece and Troy, Achilles and Hector. The battlefield, previously a chaotic free-for-all, has fallen strangely silent. All eyes, mortal and divine, are fixed on these two men, their fates intertwined, their destinies about to clash. Achilles, gleaming in his new divine armor, is a terrifying sight. His face is contorted with grief and a burning, unholy rage. He is no longer just a warrior, he is vengeance incarnate, a force of nature unleashed. Hector, noble and brave, stands before him, a champion facing his ultimate, perhaps unwinnable challenge. He knows the odds are stacked against him. He knows Achilles is practically invincible. But he also knows that the fate of Troy, the lives of his family, rest on his shoulders. He cannot, will not, flee. The two heroes circle each other, spears poised, shields ready. The air crackles with tension. You can almost hear the soft rustle of their armor, the heavy thud of their feet on the dusty ground. This isn't just a fight. It's a monumental clash of ideals, of personal honor versus civic duty, of vengeance versus defense. A quirky tidbit. Just before the duel, some accounts describe Hector briefly fleeing, running around the walls of Troy 3 times, with Achilles in hot pursuit. This isn't out of cowardice, but perhaps a desperate final attempt to find an advantage or a moment of understandable human fear before facing an almost certain death. It's a fleeting glimpse of Hector's humanity, a brief moment of vulnerability before he turns to face his fate with unwavering courage. The duel begins. It's a whirlwind of bronze and steel, of thrust and parry, of mighty shouts and the clang of weapons. Achilles, fueled by his rage, fights with a ferocity that is almost inhuman. Hector, though outmatched in sheer power and speed, fights with the desperate strength of a man defending everything he loves. He knows the weak points of Achilles' old armor, which Patroclus had worn, and he tries to exploit them. But Achilles' new, divinely crafted armor is flawless, impenetrable. Then, a crucial moment. Achilles, knowing his new armor's design, it was made by Hephaestus after all, who probably left him a very detailed instruction manual, aims for the one vulnerable spot on Hector's armor, a tiny gap at the collarbone, where the neck meets the shoulder. With a precise, devastating thrust, Achilles drives his spear through, ending Hector's life. You feel the collective gasp, the sudden silence that descends upon the battlefield. Troy's greatest champion, its beloved protector, has fallen. The heart of the city has been extinguished. The sheer magnitude of this loss to the Trojans is immeasurable. But Achilles' vengeance is not satisfied with mere death. In a shocking act of brutality, driven by his overwhelming grief for Patroclus, Achilles desecrates Hector's body. He ties Hector's corpse to his chariot by the ankles and drags it around the walls of Troy, in full view of Hector's distraught parents, King Priam and Queen Hecuba, and all the weeping citizens. It's a horrific scene, an act of extreme dishonor that even the gods condemn. You feel the horror, the disgust, the chilling realization of how far Achilles has fallen in his grief and rage. This mainstream historical fact in the mythological narrative is often depicted as Achilles' moment of greatest cruelty, a stark contrast to his earlier heroic deeds. The gods, even those who favored Achilles, are appalled by this barbarity. Zeus sends Hermes to guide King Priam under the cover of night to Achilles' tent. Priam, risking his life, comes to beg for his son's body. You are there, witnessing this profoundly moving encounter. The old king, humbled and heartbroken, kneels before Achilles, kissing the hands that killed his son. He appeals to Achilles' own memories of his father, Peleus, and offers immense ransom. This moment, depicted so powerfully in the Iliad, is a turning point for Achilles. You see the rage slowly drain from him, replaced by empathy, by a shared sense of human sorrow. He sees his own father in Priam, his own mortality, his own impending death. It's a powerful and poignant scene of reconciliation, of shared humanity amidst unimaginable suffering. Achilles finally relents, allowing Priam to take Hector's body for proper burial. He even grants a truce for Hector's funeral. Historians still argue whether Achilles' desecration of Hector's body was an act of unchecked savagery or a reflection of the extreme grief and ritualistic vengeance practiced in certain ancient warrior cultures. What is clear is that this act and Achilles' subsequent moments of empathy highlight the complex and often contradictory nature of heroism in the ancient world. With Hector dead, Troy has lost its greatest defender, its shield. The city is now far more vulnerable than ever before. The war for the Greeks is finally within reach of its ultimate goal. You've witnessed the brutal climax of the duel, the fall of Hector, and the raw, unbridled grief of Achilles. Troy has lost its greatest champion, its very heart, and the Greeks, though weary, now sense victory is within their grasp. But the walls of Troy still stand, as defiant and seemingly impregnable as ever. How do you take a city that has withstood 10 years of siege, a city whose defenses are legendary? Brute force had failed. Cleverness, it seemed, was now the only option. Enter Odysseus, the master of cunning, the man whose mind was as sharp as Achilles' spear. He was the one who could turn a seemingly hopeless situation into a strategic triumph. You can almost see the gears turning in his brilliant mind, concocting a plan so audacious, so deceptively simple, it could only come from him. His idea? A giant wooden horse. Not just any horse, mind you, but one so massive it would be seen as a colossal offering, a gift to the gods, or perhaps a war trophy left by the retreating Greeks. The idea was to present it as a sign of Greek surrender, or perhaps a votive offering to Athena, who had seemingly abandoned them. It was a Trojan horse, literally, though the Trojan part would come after its fateful entry. A quirky tidbit. The common phrase, "beware of Greeks bearing gifts," originates directly from this story, a timeless warning about deceptive offerings. Even today, if someone gives you a suspiciously large and ornate gift, you might joke about it being a Trojan horse. The plan was meticulously crafted. The bulk of the Greek army would pack up their camp, burn their tents, and sail away, feigning retreat. They would hide their ships behind the nearby island of Tenedos, out of sight, ready to return at a signal. A small contingent of elite Greek warriors, led by Odysseus himself, would hide inside the hollow belly of the wooden horse. Imagine them, cramped and silent, waiting in the darkness, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and desperate hope. To further sell the deception, one Greek warrior, Sinon, was left behind. His role was crucial. He would be found by the Trojans, and through a masterful performance of lies and fabricated stories, convince them that the horse was a sacred offering, a way for the Greeks to appease the gods for their ill-fated expedition. He would claim he was left behind as a sacrifice, saved at the last minute, and that the horse was too large to be brought into the city specifically so the Trojans wouldn't benefit from its divine power. He would spin a tale of woe, emphasizing Greek despair and their ultimate departure. You watch as the Trojan scouts, cautiously emerging from their city, see the deserted Greek camp and the enormous wooden horse. Relief, then exultation, sweeps through the Trojan ranks. They believe the long, agonizing siege is finally over. Their enemies have gone. It's a moment of immense, bittersweet triumph for them. The joy must have been overwhelming after a decade of fear and deprivation. But then comes the fateful debate. Some Trojans, especially the wise priest Laocoon, are suspicious. He famously warned his countrymen, "Do not trust the horse, Trojans. Whatever it is, I fear the Greeks, even when they bring gifts." He even plunged a spear into its side, causing a metallic clang that perhaps some of the hidden Greeks inside heard, their hearts surely skipping a beat. A mainstream historical fact often debated. While the Trojan horse is iconic, there's a scholarly debate whether it was a literal wooden horse or a metaphor for a siege engine, or perhaps even a cunning maneuver to open the gates during the night. Some suggest it might have been a siege tower shaped like a horse, or even a cunning use of a previously unknown tunnel or hidden entrance. Regardless of the literal interpretation, the core idea of deception to breach an impregnable defense remains. Historians still argue whether the Trojan horse was a real event or a later mythological embellishment designed to explain Troy's sudden fall. Just as Laocoon was urging caution, a horrific event occurred. Two giant sea serpents emerged from the ocean and attacked Laocoon and his two sons, dragging them to their watery deaths. This was interpreted by the Trojans as a divine sign, a punishment from the gods for Laocoon's impiety in striking the sacred horse. Of course, it was a setup, orchestrated by the gods favoring the Greeks, perhaps Poseidon, who bore a grudge against Troy, or Athena. This sign swayed the wavering Trojan populace. With the ominous divine intervention and Sinon's persuasive lies, the Trojans decide to bring the horse inside their city walls. You can almost hear the triumphant shouts, the sound of stone on stone, as they dismantle a section of their beloved previously impenetrable walls just to get the massive wooden effigy through. It's a colossal effort, filled with joyous celebration, as they unknowingly drag their doom into the very heart of their city. That night, as the city celebrates its perceived victory with feasting and revelry, the Greek warriors, crammed inside the horse, wait. The sounds of celebration slowly fade into the quiet hum of a sleeping city. And then, at the prearranged signal, perhaps a flare from Sinon, or the sudden appearance of the Greek fleet returning from Tenedos, the trap is sprung. You feel the tension, the sheer suspense of those moments as the hidden warriors, led by Odysseus, finally emerge from the horse's belly. You are now inside the walls of Troy, a silent witness to the city's final, fateful night. The joy and relief that had filled the air just hours before have completely vanished, replaced by the choking smoke of burning buildings and the terrified screams of the innocent. The Trojan horse, which they had dragged in with such triumph, now stands as a grim monument to their fatal error, disgorging its deadly cargo. From the horse's hollow belly, the elite Greek warriors emerge, Odysseus, ever the strategist, leading the way, the mighty Menelaus, burning with a decade's worth of vengeance for his stolen wife, the brave Diomedes, and the formidable Ajax the Lesser, not to be confused with the giant Ajax the Greater, who is also there, likely wielding something truly enormous. They move swiftly, silently, through the sleeping city. Their first task? To open the main gates of Troy, allowing the rest of the Greek army, who have sailed back from Tenedos and landed undetected, to pour in. You can almost feel the shock, the terror, as the sleeping Trojans are awakened not by the familiar clang of distant battle, but by the horrific reality of enemies within their very homes. The city, which had believed itself safe, is now a death trap. This is not a glorious battle. It is a slaughter. The element of surprise is absolute. The Greeks' vengeance, swift and brutal. The Trojan royal palace becomes a particular scene of horror. King Priam, the aged monarch who had ruled Troy for so long, attempts to fight, despite his advanced years. He dons his armor, a valiant but futile gesture. You watch as he is brutally cut down at the altar by Neoptolemus, Achilles' son. Neoptolemus, inheriting his father's ferocity but perhaps lacking his nuanced sense of honor, shows no mercy. This is a mainstream historical fact in the mythological narrative, often cited as one of the most poignant and tragic moments of Troy's fall, the venerable king's final, desperate stand. The royal family of Troy suffers terribly. Cassandra, Priam's daughter, cursed by Apollo to foresee the future, but never to be believed. A quirky tidbit that adds to the tragedy, she told them about the horse, but no one listened. Is dragged from Athena's temple and brutally taken by Ajax the Lesser. It's an act of sacrilege that will have dire consequences for Ajax and the Greeks on their return journey. And then there is Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships. Her fate is a subject of much ancient debate. Some accounts say Menelaus, burning with fury, intended to kill her. You can almost see him, sword drawn, confronting her in the chaos. But then, mesmerized by her legendary beauty, or perhaps swayed by the intervention of Aphrodite, he drops his sword and takes her back. Others say she was merely a prize, passed back to Menelaus. Historians still argue whether Helen truly loved Paris, if she was a willing accomplice, or simply a pawn of the gods. Was she a victim, a seductress, or something in between? Her story, like much of the war, is shrouded in conflicting interpretations. The city burns. You can smell the smoke, hear the crackle of flames as they consume timber and tapestry, the agonizing cries of the dying. The once proud city, with its magnificent temples and bustling marketplaces, is reduced to ashes and rubble. The Trojans, after 10 years of valiant defense, are utterly annihilated. Men are killed, women and children are enslaved, the wealth of the city plundered. It is a complete and devastating victory for the Greeks, a testament to the power of deception and the ruthlessness of war. The fall of Troy is depicted as an apocalyptic event, a night of unspeakable horror and destruction. It marks the complete end of an era, the destruction of a powerful civilization. For the Greeks, it is the culmination of their decade-long struggle, the vengeance for Menelaus's honor, and the fulfillment of their ambitious quest for glory and riches. But even in their victory, there's a grim undertone. The brutal acts committed, the desecration of temples, the slaughter of innocents, these actions will not go unpunished. The gods, who had helped the Greeks in their war, will now turn their wrath upon many of the returning heroes, ensuring that their journeys home will be long, arduous, and fraught with peril. The seeds of future tragedies are sown in the burning ruins of Troy. You are left with the lingering image of a once great city in flames, its people scattered or dead, and the chilling realization that even victory comes at an immense, often brutal, cost. You've witnessed the cataclysmic fall of Troy, the final brutal crescendo of a decade-long war. The city, once proud and unyielding, now lies in smoking ruins, a testament to vengeance and the devastating power of human and divine conflict. The Greeks, having achieved their objective, now turn their thoughts homeward. But their journey, you will soon discover, will be far from triumphant. The gods, whose subtle manipulations and overt interventions shaped this war, are far from finished with the Achaean heroes. The wind down begins immediately after the sacking of Troy. The Greeks divide the vast spoils, the accumulated wealth of a prosperous city, and tragically, the women and children destined for slavery. You can almost feel the quiet exhaustion mixed with the grim satisfaction as they systematically dismantle the remnants of what was once a vibrant civilization. This isn't the joyous celebration you might expect. It's a somber, brutal reckoning. But as they prepare to sail, discord quickly erupts among the Greek leaders. This is a crucial, mainstream historical fact that often gets overshadowed by the main war. The returns, or nostoi, of the Greek heroes were often as fraught with peril, divine wrath, and personal tragedy as the war itself. Agamemnon, for instance, once again makes a questionable decision. He quarrels with Menelaus over the timing of their departure. More significantly, he offends the goddess Athena, who had been a fierce ally throughout the war, by allowing the desecration of her temple and the brutal treatment of Cassandra by Ajax the Lesser. You never want to tick off a goddess, especially one as formidable as Athena. So, the return journeys are not a smooth sail across calm seas. The gods, now angered by the Greeks' impiety and arrogance in victory, scatter their fleet with terrible storms. Poseidon, still bearing a grudge against Troy, unleashes his fury upon the ships. You can almost hear the howl of the gale, the crash of waves against splintering hulls, the desperate cries of men as their ships are tossed about like toys. Many ships are lost, many warriors drown, and others are driven far off course. beginning epic wanderings that would last for years. Agamemnon, the king who led the entire expedition, faces the most bitter homecoming. He sails home to Mycenae, expecting a hero's welcome. But waiting for him is his enraged wife, Clytemnestra, still seething from the sacrifice of their daughter, Iphigenia, 10 years earlier. She has taken a lover, Aegisthus, during his long absence. You can almost feel the chilling air of betrayal as Agamemnon steps onto his home soil, only to be murdered by his own wife and her lover. It's a brutal, tragic end for the supreme commander, a chilling cycle of vengeance that highlights the destructive legacy of the war. Menelaus, the original wronged husband, has a long and arduous journey home with Helen, but eventually they do make it back to Sparta and reportedly live out their lives. You can almost picture them, an aging power couple, perhaps still arguing over whether the whole elopement thing was Aphrodite's fault or just a really bad judgment call. The great Ajax the Greater, the strong one, not the one who offended Athena, makes it home but tragically commits suicide after a dispute with Odysseus over Achilles' armor. A story that again highlights the dangerous power of pride and envy among heroes. His rival, Ajax the Lesser, who desecrated Athena's temple, perishes in a terrible storm, struck down by Poseidon at Athena's urging. See, I told you not to tick off a goddess. And then there's Odysseus, perhaps the most famous of all the returning heroes. His journey home to Ithaca becomes an epic in itself, a tale of monstrous encounters, tempting enchantresses, and perilous trials that will stretch for another 10 years. You feel the weariness of his prolonged wanderings, the longing for his faithful wife Penelope and his son Telemachus, whom he left as an infant and would return to find a young man. His is a story of incredible resilience, cunning, and endurance, but also of profound loss and hardship. A quirky tidbit, the phrase Odyssey itself, meaning a long wandering journey, comes directly from the story of Odysseus's difficult return. So, when you're stuck in traffic on a long road trip, you can tell yourself you're on a modern-day Odyssey. Historians still argue whether the Odyssey, Homer's epic poem about Odysseus's return, is a purely fictional adventure or contains echoes of real ancient seafaring and exploration. The answer likely is a beautiful blend of both. The Trojan War in many ways marks the end of an era. The age of great heroes, of direct divine intervention, seems to recede. The world shifts, moving towards new forms of governance, new ways of understanding the gods and human destiny. The fall of Troy becomes a cautionary tale, a narrative passed down through generations about the costs of pride, the power of fate, and the enduring consequences of a single, fateful decision. You are left with the quiet echo of distant battles, the whisper of ancient winds carrying tales of heroes and gods. The grand tapestry of the Trojan War, now complete, its threads of glory and tragedy woven together, leaves you with a profound sense of the human spirit's capacity for both immense cruelty and astonishing resilience. The heroes, the gods, the city of Troy, they fade now, like embers in a dying fire, their stories settling into the quiet corners of your mind. And as the last whispers of this epic saga fade, you can feel the quiet settling in, a peaceful stillness after the storm of ancient tales. The heroes have returned, or failed to, and their stories, full of sound and fury, now become part of the tranquil silence. You can gently close your eyes, letting the long journey of battles and legends drift away, replaced by the soft blanket of calm. The echoes of a world long past slowly recede, leaving you with nothing but the quiet hum of the night, a peaceful current carrying you further into sleep. The Great War is over, the stories told, and now it's time for quiet dreams.